Today I want to go over a few different Punnett square crosses. We're going to go over 6 today to uh, determine the outcomes of the genotype percentages and the phenotype percentages. So here in this worksheet here, we have 9 different crosses, but we're only going to do 6 of them today. Okay, so what I want you to do is just kind of follow along, because at some point in the near future, you are going to be asked to create your own Punnett squares. So over here on the left, okay, I just have a couple of quick reminders of what you've already learned. Homozygous dominant, okay, represented by 2 capital letters. Homozygous recessive genotypes, 2 lowercase letters. A heterozygous genotype has 1 dominant, 1 recessive. And remember, the genotypes, the alleles, you would get the alleles, 1 from each parent. Okay, they're just 2-letter combinations. And then the phenotype is what it will look like. Will that genotype tell us that it's showing the dominant trait or the recessive trait? Okay, so here in Punnett square number 1, we are going to cross homozygous dominant with another homozygous dominant. And as you can see, we put 1 parent up top, 1 parent to the side. So for our purposes here today, why don't we say that the father's genotypes will be on the top, the mother's genotypes will be on the side. All right, so let's fill in each square. Okay, we have capital A, that will result in homozygous dominant. Okay, 2 capital letters, homozygous dominant. Okay, and then capital A. All right, and then capital A. All right, so here when we cross 2 homozygous dominant parents, all right, their offspring are also going to be homozygous dominant. All right, so if we look here at the offspring genotype percentages, now remember there are 4 squares. Each square counts for 25%, making up 100. So when we look at the genotype percentages, how many capital A's do we see? We see 4. That makes up 100%. Heterozygous and homozygous recessive, none represented here. So that's 0%. Now, offspring phenotype percentage. What percentage of their offspring is going to be dominant? Well, let's take a look. All right, in each square there's at least 1 capital letter represented. Therefore, we see in this square 100% dominant, 0% recessive. In question 2, here we are crossing a homozygous dominant with a heterozygous parent. Okay, so we got our capital A, our dominant here, and then our heterozygous here. All right, so we fill in the squares. Capital A, capital A, capital A, capital A, capital A, lowercase a. Now, we always want to put the capital letter first, not the other way around. And then same thing here, capital A, lowercase a. All right, so here we see a little bit of a difference. All right, again, we're looking at our genotype percentages. How many of the capital A's do we see? I see 2 boxes out of 4, 2 out of 4, 50%. How many heterozygous? All right, I see 2 out of the 4 boxes, so that's going to be 50%. And how many homozygous recessives? There are 0 in this Punnett square. So let's look at now our offspring phenotypes. What are their children going to look like? Well, are they going to have the dominant traits, or are they going to have the recessive traits? Well, each box has a capital letter. Remember, the capital letter overrides the lowercase. Anytime there is a dominant allele in the genotype, it's going to show the dominant trait. So here in this cross, we also have 100% dominant, 0% recessive. Even though 2 out of the 4 will carry the recessive trait, they may not see that trait until the next generation. All right, here in the third Punnett square, we have homozygous dominant crossed with a homozygous recessive parent. All right, so let's fill in the Punnett square. We got capital A, lowercase a, capital A, lowercase a, capital A, lowercase a, and capital A, lowercase a. So what you're seeing right now is you're probably saying to yourself, wow, they're all heterozygous. One capital, one lowercase. Well, you are correct. So here we have 0 homozygous dominant. We have 100% heterozygous, capital A, lowercase a, and we have 0% of homozygous recessive. Now, offspring phenotypes. What percent is dominant? Well, again, 4 capital letters represented in this Punnett square, 1 in each box, going to give us 100%, and then recessive, 0. Okay, so far so good. All right, pause at any time. All right, let's take a look at a couple other types of crosses. We're going to skip number 4, okay, because we already did number 4. Dominant with heterozygous. Okay, dominant with heterozygous. That actually was up here. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel. But let's take a look at when we cross 2 heterozygous parents. All right, we fill in the squares. This square we have capital A, capital A. Over here we have heterozygous. Here also heterozygous. And down here in this right-hand box, we have lowercase a, lowercase a. Now, we haven't seen that one yet. All right, homozygous recessive. All right, so we want to know the genotype percentage. What percentage has homozygous dominant? Well, there's just one. Okay, so 25%. What percent has heterozygous? Well, I see 2 out of the 4. So 25 and 25 is 50%. And then what percent is homozygous recessive? That's 25%. So here, we have 25, 50, 25. That's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. All right, you may be familiar with ratios in math, right? And all we're doing is saying is there's 1 homozygous dominant, there's 2 heterozygous, and there's 1 homozygous recessive. All right, so I've been asking you to find the genotype percentage, but if I asked you to find the genotype ratio, you just put the numbers that you see. These numbers have to equal 4 because there are 4 boxes. All right, let's look into the percentage of their phenotype. What percent would have the dominant phenotype? Well, I see 1 capital, 1 capital, 1 capital. That's 3. So 3 out of 4 is 75%. And then what percent of the offspring would be homozygous recessive? Just 1 out of the 4, 25%. And again, this should total 100%. All right, to keep the math nice and easy. All right, our next cross, we're going to cross a heterozygous with a homozygous recessive. Okay, so just for time constraints, I'm going to speed it up. I'm going to fill in the block. Okay. By now, you should know how to fill in each square. You get 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom. It's like reading a graph. All right, so genotype percentage. What do we see here for homozygous dominant? I don't see any. How about for heterozygous? Well, I see 2 out of the 4. Okay, 2 out of 4 is 50%. And then what do I see for homozygous recessive? Well, I see 2 out of the 4 boxes. That's also 50%. So if we wanted to do a ratio, I could say that it is a 2 to 2 ratio. Now, why are you asking, why don't we put a 0? You don't need to. All right, just put the 2 that are represented in this case, because these 2 numbers should equal the 4 boxes. 2 plus 2 is 4. All right, how many are dominant? What percentage is dominant? Well, there's only 2 boxes with a capital letter in it. 2 out of 4 is 50%. And then recessive, 50% of their offspring will be recessive. All right. And then we're going to do one more square, one that we haven't seen yet. And that is going to be what happens when we cross 2 homozygous recessive parents. All right, well, you should be able to fly through this square. They're all lowercase letters, similar to the first one we did with homozygous dominant. All right, so here we have 0% homozygous dominant, 0% heterozygous, and 100% homozygous recessive. So now, if I ask you to find the genotype ratio, you would say, well, it is a 4 to 0 ratio of homozygous recessive to dominant, because there are 4 and there is 0. Remember, these 2 have to equal 4. 4 plus 0 is 4. All right, so what percent is dominant? There's 0% dominant, 100% recessive. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this copy in Google Classroom as a reference because you will be asked to go over or to look at these squares and answer a few questions. Okay, and just some of the questions that you will be asked in reference to this document that we just did is, for example, what crosses will result in all dominant phenotype? Okay, well, let's go back to what we did. What crosses will result in an all dominant phenotype? Well, you go back to your dominant. All dominant, 100 to 0. So capital A times capital A. So homozygous dominant and a homozygous dominant parent. So this would be one answer to it. All right. So if you refer to the percentages, you'll be able to answer, okay, these questions. Now, if you have any other questions, feel free to email me and we can set up a few more examples. But for now, review the video if you don't understand and go over it as much as you can and look for the next assignment online.